Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our last Valley of the Sun webinar for 2020. I'm Chris Barker, Vice President and member of the board for our chapter in Valley of the Sun. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to our talk today. I have a very good friend and longtime colleague joining us today who is going to talk about transportation 2021 and what lies ahead. And I'd like to take a moment and introduce Mike Courtney. Mike is the CEO for Aperio Insights. He's a leading industry researcher and futurist, and somebody I've known for years, dating back to many South by Southwest conferences years ago. And we thought this time of the year, and especially the year that we've had, that it might be kind of nice to kind of get a sense of what have we learned and where might we be going next in the brave world of transportation and perhaps the broader society. So welcome, Mike. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning, all the way from Dallas. And I guess I want to just kick it off. I mean, you being a futurist, did you have any idea a year ago that the year we're having now would even be remotely the case or possible?
Not exactly, but we always look out to the future to try to figure out what things could sort of go off the rails and how that might go wrong. And so some of what's happened this past year, we had modeled in the past and sort of said, well, we didn't know exactly what thing would happen, but that things like this could happen. So some of it was a surprise, others not so much.
Good. And I would imagine that you are a very popular guy for all of us who are looking for hope and inspiration for the year ahead.
Well, hope and inspiration, yeah. I mean, this time of year in the fall, it's sort of like, we've just come through Thanksgiving. Before that, Halloween, we're getting ready for Christmas. So in futurist terms, we've sort of got the perfect trifecta. You've got things that you should be afraid of, things you're thankful for, and things that you wish for yourself and others.
Very good. Well, we're excited to have you join us this morning and to share your thoughts. I just will brief housekeeping item. Normally, we try to weave questions in throughout the course of the presentation. This presentation has quite a bit of content to it, so we'll likely hold our questions to the back part of the hour. Please, if you have questions, feel free to pop them up into the chat window, and we'll try to get as many of those covered during the back part of the hour-long discussion. And with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So imagine you're in a parking lot, maybe to a little convenience store, and you see one of these pull up with a couple of folks in it. Somebody gets out the passenger side, and they go in the store and they buy a fistful of lottery tickets, and maybe something to drink. And as they're coming out, you sort of get the sense that, well, maybe they've been doing other things that day. Now, if all those things combined make you think, oh, that must be a futurist, you'd be thinking along the lines of what many people think when they think of a futurist. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people where they say, hey, what do you do? I say, well, I'm a researcher and futurist. And they immediately, so do you drive a DeLorean? And you must be really good at playing the lottery. How many times have you won the lottery? And well, so to do work, does that mean you have to start drinking really early, or do you do other stuff, or do you only work at night? And what I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit about how a futurist thinks and some of the tools that we use. And then it's not exactly like what some people might imagine, that at the end of the day, foresight and what a futurist does is a little bit more than just creativity, although creativity is part of it. The first thing I'd like to cover too is that many people say, okay, well, you're a futurist, that sounds cool, but why would I care? I mean, things are, who has time for this? Why do it? And the way I explain it is this. 2021, and the road we're first on, January road, then February road, March, et cetera. Some of those roads are going to be a little bit unfamiliar. We haven't been on those roads before. In theory, they'll be similar to some of the roads we've traveled in the past, but imagine that these roads are a little bit foggy, a little unclear. We're not really sure what'll be there. In a sense, we don't know what's around the corner. We can guess and imagine, but this is where it becomes important to understand, well, how fast are we going? If I'm going really slow, if I'm a real slow driver going 10 miles an hour, I don't really need to think about the future. I've got plenty of time to react, and whatever's around the corner, I'm not going that fast. I can slow down, avoid it, or handle it. But if you're like me and the life that I lead, things tend to be going really fast. And fast, sometimes it almost feels like track days, day after day, where our life is going faster than we're really comfortable at. So if you're going really fast, it becomes really important to have at least an idea of what you'll do depending on what's around the corner. And that's really what foresight's about, because what's around the corner could be something you've really got to deal with. You know, the road could wash out, things could be something you have to avoid or mitigate in some way. There might be bulls or bears coming up in the future. We're really not sure which. You might see things that you hadn't seen by the side of the road. Now, some of you might look at this and say, ooh, danger, danger, you know, is there blood on the axe? But one of the things as futurists we try to keep in mind is that the things that we see that are unexpected that might scare us might be dangerous, but they might actually be helpful. They might not be there to hurt us. Things like AI, machine learning, different robotics things. That guy might have been an off-duty logger trying to help clear the roads from a recent storm. Might not have been a bad thing at all. So as we go forward in today, I want you to keep in mind some of the things that scare you might actually be your best friend if we really leverage it in the right way. The other thing is everybody's like, well, hey, so you're a futurist, you have a crystal ball, you're going to predict things. It's like, we're not as much about predictions as understanding what the possibilities are, what the range of things that may or may not happen. So with that, let's teach you your first thing about foresight, because most people don't really use that term much. Here's an easy way to look at it: hindsight, insight, foresight. Now, hindsight typically is, you know, it's that looking at the past, and often it's a negative thing, right? Hindsight's always the, well, in hindsight, I shouldn't have had the dollar sushi at the gas station place. You know, you never look at hindsight and say, in hindsight, that was a fantastic choice to do that. Hindsight sort of gets the negative rap. Insight, that's looking at today. That's research, that's data, that's understanding the now. And we understand what that is. Foresight is simply looking at the future, looking at what's possible, what might be. So again, hindsight, insight, foresight. If you remember that trilogy, then you understand how to explain what foresight is. So when we think about the future, very often people think, I think about the future all the time. I read all about trends. I'm up on trends. Trends are great. But trends are like pool balls. They're visible, they're easy to see, but they're unpredictable. We notice when they're in motion, but we have a harder time to see potential for motion. And trends don't just happen organically. They don't just come out of thin air. Something caused them to happen. Something was what we call the driving force, that pool cue or other things that could call those trends to move or go into motion. Could be wind, I could tilt the table, cat could come up and slap one of the balls, all sorts of things. Those driving forces are really the key to understanding what's going on and what might then happen to those trends or create new trends. The other thing to keep in mind is at the end of the day, when we look at all this technology, all these trends, all these driving forces, we still have to come back to, well, we're people and people have timeless needs. So this idea of timeless needs was actually born years ago in the automotive space, where somebody said, well, hey, you know, we've got an important question. The CD player of the future, is it going to have 6 presets or 8? Right now it's got 5. I can see 6. If you tell me 7, I'm okay. Not sure 8 or 9 is even theoretically possible. Tell me 10, you're a nut job. It's like, well, the timeless need was entertainment. We had it in the past, we have it today, in the future, but we might not have presets. And they got a little freaked out. So we came up with this explanation that timeless needs simply are things we've done in the past, do now, and do in the future. How we do them changes. Your grandparents probably cleaned the floor of their home. Your great ancestors probably cleaned the floor of their cave. Cleaning the floor, cleaning the place you live in is a timeless need. The technology we use to do it over time changes. These days, you might have a Roomba or something robotic. In the future, maybe the floor is going to clean themselves. The timeless need is always there, and we have to keep those in mind because it grounds us into the reality of what people really need and what they really value, timeless needs. We can look at timeless needs for an environment. This is an example of one we did for a school, of a learning environment. And they sort of roughly map to some of the Maslow's concepts there. So timeless needs, imagine you're in a school. Well, I want to be able to eat and drink. I want protection from the elements. I want safety, security, clean and odor free. Some of these things may become more important over time, less important over time, depending on what's going on in the moment, but they are timeless. What we do then is we take the timeless needs and we take these driving forces and trends, and we mix them up in a unique way to create use cases. And that's what most organizations are really looking for when they think about the future's use cases, things that say, what solves a problem? What helps us approach things in a different way? Gives us an opportunity, an advantage. Here's one we did where we took the timeless needs of a clean home and some of the trends and driving forces of technology and said, well, a lot of people have pets, and it's no fun to discover that your pet had an accident when your sock gets wet. So what if you actually had a layer that would luminesce or somehow change color or notify you that, hey, there's water on the floor? Maybe not just from a pet, maybe it's in a public area where somebody spilled a soda and nobody notices it until somebody else comes along, gets their foot wet and or slips, falls, and we have an issue. So timeless needs times the trends and driving forces equal use cases and scenarios that can really help us think in a different way. So let's talk about values. Timeless needs are timeless, but the things that we value in the moment can certainly change. This past year, getting a bouquet of roses was nice, but maybe getting something else delivered was really nice, really appreciated. So those things, depending on the moment, can change dramatically. Ideas that at one point were seen as sort of like silly and stupid might, because of something like COVID, all of a sudden be, that's a great idea because I do want to wash up before and then, yeah. So we things come in and out of our lives in ways that we don't always expect. Years ago, if I would have shown you this picture, you'd probably say, oh, looks like fun. Today, you'd say, oh my God, it looks like a germ fest and I'm freaking out. In the future, we might want to do things a little differently and maybe opt for spaces that are a little less dense. We're still going to want to go places and experience luxury, but luxury might change a little bit. Even a luxury hotel or lobby might institute things permanently that we wouldn't have expected. Maybe a wash sink when you first walk in and say, before you go check in, here's a place where you can wash up, your sanitizers, your signs, reminders of what to do, what not to do. The work from home situation that many have experienced this last year means that we're blending our work and our family lives. Having kids in the room when we're working has become sort of like, yeah, okay, it's a thing. That might actually persist. We might see more people in the future when they go back to physical spaces, bringing children with them. And it might be, okay, we've seen them on Zoom a million times. Is that a big deal if somebody brings their kid to work? We've got office space, we've got conference rooms. And what is that going to mean for transport? Well, how much stroller parking do you really have? Maybe we've got to address the idea of more people going on public transport and needing to park their stroller before, after, or during. The same thing with animals. Animals are a part of our life at home. They become part of our work experience. Maybe we'll also see more animals going to the office, more animals on transportation. These things are all possible. How will that change transportation? Anybody's guess, but we might have to be thinking about different accommodations than we've thought of in the past. One of the interesting things, we see a lot of data. I'm a researcher and a futurist. We see a lot of data, and we do see evidence that people do want to get back to things. They want to get back together with family, with friends. They want to go places. The lowest one here, interact with coworkers in person. It might be because they're either comfortable with all the Zoom calls they've had, or maybe they're sick of them because of the Zoom calls. But we do see a lot of people that want to travel, want to get out and about. And so we don't think that people are going to stay, homebound forever once the pandemic is really under control and things are safe. We do see a growing love for local. Shopping in closer neighborhoods is on the rise. That we do think that some of this will persist, that the desire to help the local merchants that live near them survive will be something that does persist in terms of where people shop and where they go once they are free to move about with or without a mask. Interesting thing on the business side, organizations have had to really change dramatically and change really quickly. It's sort of like getting pushed into the deep end of the pool instead of dipping a toe in and getting in at your leisure. And it's had amazing impacts on productivity. A lot of organizations really have done well at maintaining productivity despite all this disruption. And the thing that we find most interesting is that the CEOs are telling researchers that they don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to the days where it took 3 or 4 or 5 years to put a plan together, digital transformation or otherwise, and slowly move through the process, because they've seen that their teams can actually, in really quick order, make big dramatic changes. They didn't like having to deal with COVID. It wasn't a pleasant thing, and it's had a horrible, tragic cost and price to pay along the way as well. But from a business standpoint, they're liking the idea that, wait a minute, we could make decisions much faster than we did in the past. I don't want to go back to that world. I want to go back. I want to go forward in a world that's safe, where everybody's protected from getting things that could harm them. But I don't want to go back to the world where it takes me a long time to make decisions and change my organization. Former cities of the future. So as a futurist, sometimes I talk to other futurists at their conferences, the APF, Association of Professional Futurists. So there's some slides that I pulled here that I thought were interesting, that were all about the idea that we're not the first ones to think about what's next. You're not the first ones to think about what might be next for transportation, and you won't be the last ones. That in the past, people thought of these things as well. And let's go through a couple of the things that they thought. And these are illustrations from over the past 100, 150 years where they were imagining what the future might be like. This one was what they thought the future might be like in about the year 2000. And this was, I think, from a postcard about 100, 110 years ago. That, hey, we might have a big house on wheels that we could just take out in the countryside and go someplace. We thought that maybe monorails and trains might look really different and be futuristic, looks really, really fast. Really modern. They imagined, this was back in the 50s, that they imagined that, hey, maybe the cars are going to be plug-in. Maybe they're going to actually be electric and I won't have gas. I'll just plug them in, and well, wouldn't that be cool? And in fact, sort of like a gull-wing door, Model X maybe. And they even back in the 50s thought about autonomous cars. They thought about cars that, while you can see it has a steering wheel, you can see that the driver's not driving. He's turned and talking to the other people in the vehicle, and the vehicle's driving itself. So they thought about all these things. Oh, here's one more. They thought about floating cars or flying cars, right? Sort of dystopia for Michelin and Goodyear that, hey, I don't need tires anymore. Wow. So at the end of the day, they were thinking about all these technology innovations. And as a futurist, I have to say I'm also a technology positive person. I think technology really does a great job of improving our lives and making big differences. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology that we're seeing. So we know that touchscreens have been part of our life for a long time. Everybody's got one of these and touches it 100 times a day. But they're building in that same technology into surfaces, which is going to be in the surfaces in the transportation systems around us. It might be a wall at the train station, it might be fabric on a seat, but touchscreens are going to be embedded more and more in places that you wouldn't have thought to see them in the past. The other thing, gesture control. This was just a couple of years ago, sort of like, oh, come on, really? Gesture, just hit the button. But now, just due to COVID, we're seeing a huge resurgence in interest in things like gesture control, where I just use my hand and I make a gesture and I don't physically touch anything. Great if you're trying to keep people safe or make people feel more comfortable with what is or isn't going on germ-wise on that surface. Biometrics, again, the thing about biometrics, we've had the idea for a long time, but the sensors are getting cheaper. They're getting more robust, more capable, and the software behind the sensors are able to do more and more. Just the other day, I was talking to somebody who actually had flown and gone through some security measures, and despite having a mask on, they were able to be detected as to who they were, and the systems pulled up their identity, despite the fact they had a mask on. So biometrics definitely getting much better, sensors getting cheaper, and this is going to give us access to not only vehicles, zip cars, and things, but to be able to use in place of a payment, in place of a Metro card, or giving somebody money to get on a bus, train, or some other transport. The biometrics is just going to make an easier, smoother process in general, vehicle to infrastructure. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and it goes along with gesture in a sense, but the idea of haptics, truly being able to feel some sort of resistance or pressure on your fingers, and you can feel an object that's not there. And if you can feel an object that's not there, combined with actually making a gesture, you might be able to feel a knob that's not there and actually turn it and actually have it turn that dial. Another thing that's sort of haptics related, this is a fun video we found, that surfaces might become very tactile and able to do things that, now this is moving a phone, but imagine that was a piece of trash on a seat in an autonomous vehicle or on a bus that Well, if nobody's there to pick it up, who will pick it up? Who will move it off to the side and put it in the trash? That maybe the surfaces themselves will be able to come to the rescue and move that candy wrapper over and put it into a trash bin, or move something over and clean a seat off. Getting passengers to return to transportation is an issue that we've been helping organizations with all throughout COVID, because it is a big concern. And their perceptions really will drive that return to normal. We know already that people are going to expect safer and cleaner than what they expected before. Certainly not the old rusty, environments that may have existed in some lower end places, but almost more towards the end of hospital clean. They're going to want things really clean, and they're going to want it evident that there's something going on there. We're going to move from occasionally cleaning and sanitizing to some sort of a continuous. We still have to clean things because dirt still has to be actually cleaned, but we're going to actually move to continuous pathogen reduction. And pathogen reduction is a new term. Most people haven't ever dealt with pathogens, really. It's like, yeah, we have a cleaning crew, but they sanitize or wipe things down, but pathogens is a new term that we're going to have to come to grips with. If we think about it, things have always been in the air, and for a long time, we didn't really care too much about it, right? 18th century, we finally said, hey, there's a lot of things coming in the air based on coal. So we said, well, hey, let's invent a filter. And that was really the first time. Then along the way, we developed other things, respirators, other filters. But now we're going to actually come up with things that go beyond just a filter that filters the air that goes past it. We're actually now going to get into the realm of putting things into the air that when that air goes out into the environment and touches all the bad stuff, it kills the bad pathogens, but it doesn't hurt people, plants, or pets. So this is actually an article that came out this morning. I happened to throw in an image from it from the New York Times, the newest hotel amenity, virus scrubbed air to inoculate the air. How some of the technology works is basically photocatalytic oxidation. They take the humidity in the air, they bounce light against a catalyst, they have a chemical reaction, and what it off-gasses is forms of advanced oxidation, H2O2, ions, and so on, that actually will go out into the air, safe for humans, pets, plants, but it's not safe for pathogens. It actually interacts with pathogens without having to go through the filter, without having to go through the air handler. It will actually zap things out where that air is and kill the bugs and germs where the bugs and germs are. Here's some test data from one of the companies we've been talking to that actually tested on actual COVID-19. They got the virus, I don't know how, but apparently they got some and went through a testing mechanism that they showed that in pretty quick time, they're able to actually, by putting things into the air, actually kill off COVID-19 in the air. So technology is going to make dealing with things like COVID-19 easier, and whatever comes after COVID-19, because we know that something else will come. This won't be the last thing that's going to be transmitted that we're going to have to worry about in our lifetime. Other things will come, and I think we're going to be more and more ready for it. So not only the ability to mitigate things and actually kill the bad stuff that we don't want in our environment, but to detect it. Already there are sensors that you can get, internet connected sensors that tell you readings for particulates and things in the air, particulates and VOCs. This is, I think, out in Salt Lake, where obviously that 485 that you see sort of center mass there, something's going on there. Maybe a factory, or maybe there's a fire or something going on. And we can sort of see, well, where are the hot spots that might be places we either need to avoid or put additional remediation or do something different. But there's also something else interesting we found this last 6 months. This is a device about the size of a couple of packs of cards that you put into your environment that in real time pulls in air, senses the air, and can detect bacteria, molds and fungus, and virus load in real time. So imagine you're at an airport where we all know what it's like to do this and go through the detector that's meant to detect weapons and metal. Imagine that you did this and something would sniff the air around you and say, I detect some virus. We might have to have you step aside and let's do some further screening, or open up the windows or turn on the fresh air exchange and try to control this before it gets out of hand. So this type of technology we think is really, really important, and really going to change how we interact with public spaces and public transportation in general, to know whether there's something in the air that's at risk or not. It's going to be like a thermostat or a smoke detector, but it's detecting viruses. So really exciting stuff there. Another thing to keep in mind is unintended consequences. Well, this is actually a metal that was invented about 3 years ago. They're still working on commercializing it for larger volume, but this is a metal, really strong metal, 100 times lighter than styrofoam. Again, 100 times lighter than styrofoam. So imagine making vehicles, buses, trains, cars out of a metal that's really, really light. If you're like me, you're probably thinking, wow, that's great. My energy consumption is going to drop. These are going to be fantastic. I can go farther on less fuel, but we also have to keep in mind with all this technology, what's the unintended consequence? One of them might be a slight gust of wind becomes a big problem. I've got a really light vehicle. Now what's going to happen? It's going to blow the bus over into somebody's yard, ruin Mrs. Smith's, flower garden or something. So in the future, those of you that maybe have parking structures or parking as part of your environment, parking might be free, but you might charge for the tie down. I say, yeah, you can park. Yeah, parking's free. Oh, you want to tie it? Oh, that's $5 an hour. So unintended consequences, different things to think of when it comes to that. So what happened along the way? We dreamed over the years, going back thousands of years, people dreamed about what the future would be. And over time, some of those things came true. The idea of, well, maybe I have a house on wheels. Maybe I've got an autonomous vehicle. Maybe I've got a car that doesn't need wheels or can float and fly. We do exist now. And we've almost reached the point where it's like, well, try to impress people. We've got all these things around us that would have impressed the people that came before us, would have impressed our ancestors and relatives. And today we're sort of like, is it impressive? It's not so impressive. And we have to, I think, stop and remember that these things are really fantastic innovation. And in the past, technology was different. In the future, deciding what we want, deciding what choices we're going to make, that's the real challenge. So not only dreaming big enough, but deciding what it is we want to do. And technology is no longer. There's been a lag in the past between what we can imagine and our ability to do it, our capability. Again, people imagined flying, like a bird 1,000 years ago, drove images on cave walls. But we didn't have the ability to do that. But more and more technology is catching up, and pretty soon we're going to be in sync. And as soon as you can imagine something, if you get enough people behind you and enough consensus, you're going to be able to do it. It's no longer, well, that's a great idea, Bob, but could never do that. Technology's not there. It is there. And it's getting really, really fast. So at the end of the day, do we duct tape the old system back together or build a new system and move forward? Everybody's wanted to move back to, can't wait to get back to normal, back to normal for a million times. But do we really want to go back to everything we had before, everything we thought was normal? And as a futurist, I'm here to say that the future is an and. And it's not about which one tool we use, but which tools do we have ready to use, which combination. At the end of the day, foresight, thinking like a futurist, gives us an advantage. It helps us think about things that drive change. We understand the driving change, those driving forces. It gives us the leverage points that can really make a difference, really amplify the impact. But at the end of the day, despite all the technology, we have to keep in mind that we're doing things to improve people's lives. And sometimes it's as simple as a ramp. Sometimes it's as simple as the shape of an object or how an object's designed that'll make a difference for people. And that, as a futurist, is what I really enjoy in the work that I do and the projects I work on, is that the things we're helping them think about really do help everyday people live a better life and really improve their day-to-day activities. So hopefully that's something that helps you think about 2021 and how things might go. I'd love to open up for Q&A. Sorry, I think my audio was cutting out for a second. I heard a snap crackle, but let me know if I need to go back and repeat the last couple of slides or if you got the gist.
Thanks, Mike. I think that was good. Yeah, we just a couple of seconds there we lost you, or it got a little garbled. But I'd like to. This is great. I'd like to open this up to questions. To if folks have questions for Mike, please feel free to post those to the chat window. I certainly have some questions, and I'm guessing others do as well. One thing I wanted to go back to, Mike, you talked about how this kind of pace of innovation, the normal process that we were accustomed to, of how organizations make decisions, and now how, in light of this year's events, circumstances have changed and things are moving at a faster pace. When you look at things like the haptics and the biometrics and some of these innovations that you outlined, what is your realistic expectation of how some of those things may take hold as we move into the next year and years beyond that point? As far as the pace of introducing something that may look perhaps a little radical or a little bit too far ahead, what's your thought on that?
So, I mean, we've seen just huge acceleration in terms of things like touchless, contact-free, haptics, gesture, huge. And again, those technologies have existed for a long time, but as you know, technologies take a long time to evolve because you have to have the first person says, okay, I'll spend the crazy money to install it and try it. And that gives that startup company or their organization the money to then try to rework and make a less expensive version, et cetera, et cetera. Those companies have increasingly this year been saying, wow, demand is just off the charts. We've got huge companies calling us saying, hey, we've got this big airport and we want everything to be this, or we've got this big public space, we want everything to include that. And we're just going to see a great acceleration towards those same technologies that some people have been playing with, but now it's going to become almost table stakes that if in the next year or two you don't have some of these things, it could start to swing traffic in a sense. Some people might say, well, do I want to go to this grocery store or that one? Well, this grocery store has the app where I can check out. Sam's has the app where I can check out and scan everything and not have to wait in a line, not have to be there longer than I want to. Costco right now doesn't. So those things are shifting behavior in droves. So we're seeing just huge acceleration.
And you also mentioned pathogen reduction.
Yeah.
A newer concept. How are we going to balance as a society, allowing people to kind of get into our space and look if we're, susceptible to something, balancing personal privacy with public awareness and safety? How do we balance those two things in your mind?
So, I mean, I think the first thing about public spaces is that there are things you can do environmentally that don't require human compliance, right? Today, if you go to the grocery store, in most places, you're asked to and expected to wear a mask, but that requires human compliance. So building things into the HVAC system, building things into that built environment that can help mitigate things and help clean things faster and help issues dissipate faster, I think is just going to become the norm. And we didn't always think that way, right? I mean, think about even maybe 200 years ago, you could perhaps have walked into, a restaurant or a cafe 200 years ago, and it might not have been common for them to clean the table or, or make things a certain way. But now we sort of expect something. We expect, oh, I'm going to go to a restaurant and things are clean, things are wiped down. And now during COVID, we expect to almost see somebody have cleaned it. Not just that it's clean and it looks clean, but I want to see somebody wiped it before I sat down. So in the future, I think we'll have more technology that reassures people and is not only cleaner, more safe, more disinfected, but will actually, again, give them confidence in a way.
Good. Our colleague Ruth Ryman has some questions. Go ahead, Ruth, if you want to open your mic.
Yep, thank you. A couple things. We're working in Tucson on our next RTA plan for 20 years, and they're building it through a structure that exists currently. How do you convince these people planning for 20 years, and how do you build in flexibility for technology that you don't know exists now? How do you do a 20-year plan not knowing what the future looks like?
Good question. So there is an awful lot that we do know about what's possible, right? Can I exactly tell you when certain things will happen? Not necessarily. The timing is always a tough part. But I would encourage those of you that are trying to plan for something that's 10, 15, 20 years out, to look at sort of early stages, those weak signals of things that might change, and then say, well, how might I accommodate this if it becomes true, if it becomes widespread, mainstream? One of the examples is even just electricity. So there's a company out there that's been trying to get started and trying to get a foothold, and now they're, I think, finally have the right wind under their sails, that is all about wireless electricity. So electricity at distance, meaning Chris has that lamp behind him. Imagine that lamp, or imagine the thing on the wall behind Chris's head there, that smoke detector. Imagine that's actually a little wireless electricity, sort of like a Wi-Fi repeater that sends out a signal, and that signal is captured by a device like a lamp or a TV, turns that little signal back in, that motion of signal, like a tuning fork, back into electricity, and lights the light or turns the TV on. We're going to see things like wireless electricity. It exists today. It's really just a case of at what point does it become mainstream? And if I'm building out an environment, to know that in the future, if I have to change things, I might be able to just put in wireless electricity and be able to reconfigure things really quickly and on the fly, because I didn't have to bring in the electrical folks and run actual physical wire. So there's a lot of things that are sort of on the verge, that are those early signals. Aware of those, it just might change your thinking enough to be that much more prepared. I don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, that was helpful. It's still challenging to get people to allow for flexibility when they want to define everything so that the voters can vote on something, and they want to see that this road is being built. But in 15 years, you may not need that road, or you may have needs for some other mode of transportation, whatever. So it's very hard to allow for that in a structured, when they want to define everything in advance.
Yeah.
But we're working on it.
Yeah, it is. And again, we've recently done a project for a municipality looking at potentially a new airport, a new commercial airport. And all the decisions they had to make, knowing that it's going to take a certain amount of time for sort of the permits, the legal, the land, all those things, then also, well, with the technology and how might things change. But happy to follow up later and give you a little bit more tips and tricks on the things you can do to sort of help future-proof it in a sense. You can't get everything perfect, but you can make things a little bit more flexible to accommodate what might happen in a given time frame. And we sometimes work on projects where we go out 50 or 70 years. So 20 years, not so long.
I have more questions, Chris, but I'll
Yeah,
let people go. So
go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back. I've got a question. Peter Eklund's got a question, I think, on autonomous.
Yes, thank you.
Automated buses, vehicles and buses. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Yeah, if you have any comments on automated cars and then also automated buses, the issues are different for each of them. Transportation people have always tried to want to cut down on headways, vehicle spacing, because that would increase the capacity. Now in transit, 80% of the cost is labor. So if you automated buses could, that would make them a lot more economical if you could work out the ability to operate automated buses in a specific area. So you didn't mention either of those, but I think they're it's worth considering as something in the near future.
Oh, sure. And Peter, there's probably 1,000,001 things I didn't mention that I would love to if we had more time. But so I definitely think autonomous vehicles are going to be part of the future, and certainly autonomous buses, because they tend to follow a specific route or routes, so they sort of know what their environment's going to be. And during times like COVID, not only does it save labor, but do I really want a bus driver at risk, or do I want the passenger at risk if the bus driver might be sick? No. But the other thing to keep in mind is that even when we have autonomously driven vehicles, autonomously controlled vehicles, the need for human help may not go away. It just is repurposed. Imagine a bus that's not being driven by a human, but has a human assistant on it to help people on and off, maybe with their luggage, maybe people with disabilities, maybe somebody who's elderly. There's going to be a lot of human help still needed. even for, I mean, imagine an autonomous Uber. Okay, great. I can call the autonomous Uber and, go somewhere. But what if the somewhere I need to go is the vet? And what if I'm working and I don't have time to go there? So maybe there'd be somebody that either comes with a vehicle, not to drive it, but to make sure my car doesn't, or my dog doesn't tear the car up, or my cat doesn't escape, gets it to the vet, drops it off, and another autonomous Uber brings it back. Human help, and I pay more than a normal Uber for that, not because it's driven by a computer, but because there's a human there to do the things I really need them to do. Maybe take my grandmother to the grocery store and not only get them to the store, but help them around the store, help them load the bags in the bag, and then actually help them get the bags up the stairs and into their kitchen. That'd be a blessing. That'd be fantastic. So do I need the person to drive the vehicle? No, but I might need them to do all sorts of other tasks that really a human's best for, that go along with that transportation aspect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We've got a question from Lisa K. Lisa, if you want to go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your questions to
Sure.
Mike.
Hi, Mike, first of all, and Chris, thank you for bringing this session today. This has been really interesting, and I spend most of my days on virtual meetings, and I actually stopped everything to listen, which is very unusual, because it was so interesting. I work for Carnegie Mellon University on the Traffic 21 and Mobility 21 University Transportation Center. And so I'm on the research side now in transportation, and it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, because I'm dealing and working with researchers who are developing a lot of those technologies. And I find myself often the one in the room because of my previous life in ride sharing to talk about what the people are going to do, and there's kind of this dichotomy between the two. But one of the things that we've been trying to work on very consciously is equity and transportation. And so one of the things I didn't hear you bring up, and I know you said you've lots of things to talk about, but how do we look at a future that is equitable and provides opportunities for everyone? Because the things that we've been talking about to this point work really well if you have an unlimited checkbook. But it doesn't work as well for people who don't. So I'm curious how you see the role of equity kind of flowing through the different threads that you've been talking about.
Sure, and we've looked at the impact of that in like neighborhoods that are underserved with public transportation, where not everybody has a car, and the difference between having a job and getting is really, do I have the 2 hours to get to work and back each way? And that's horrible to say, okay, well, they would work, but it would take them 4 hours a day to get there and back. And therefore, that's why they sometimes choose not to work, which is just horrible, because they want to work and we need those workers. So the one thing I can say about technology is that man plus machine is always better than man or machine. And the combination really does make us more efficient. Whether it's the fact that I don't have to have a human driver maybe drive a vehicle, or that I can use AI to plan a route that might be different on Tuesdays and Thursdays than it is on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, because that's where the people need to be and the routes can be different on those days. And simply by, speaking into your phone or making a request to say, hey, I've got to be at the hospital tomorrow for my shift to work, or the factory tomorrow for my shift to work at 8 o'clock, but the next day I'm changing my shift, I don't have to be there till 3 o'clock. If the system knew and could adjust schedules of buses and transportation and that last mile, that might make all the difference in the world. Because when you can save even just 10% or 20% or 30% of the cost, that ends up being really, really impactful for people in a lower economic situation versus those that have more affluence. So I really think that automation and technology is going to really help bring the cost down to the point where I'd really love to see transportation be one of those things where you don't even think about the cost. Just like water. I mean, most people, at least in this country, don't really think about water other than, well, okay, we shouldn't take a really long shower because we should save the water for the planet, but it's not really because of cost. And I think the technology is going to get to the point where the cost for things like energy, the cost for things like that are related to energy, transportation, heating and cooling, et cetera, become minimal. And I think we'll see that in our lifetime, that energy cost drops down, the intelligence of the whole network increases, sensors get cheaper, and we can serve people's needs. That's, in some cases, taking the human out, in other cases, taking the cost out and leaving a human to help those other humans. So I really think that the benefit of technology is to benefit humanity. And I definitely think that it will help people who don't make as much money.
Okay, thank you.
I would love to talk more about it offline because it's a passion of mine. There's so much there I think we could do. And one more example is, if you think about some of us, more affluent people than less affluent people are more likely to have a Nest thermostat or something digital. And in theory, it's a convenience. It makes it easy. I don't have to get up out of the chair and go to the wall, right? And it saves a little energy, maybe 10, 15%. But if you're lower income, you probably don't have one of those. And saving 10% in your energy bill would actually matter. And so as those things can get cheaper and cheaper, I mean, wow. What if it was a $10 thermostat that was still something that could save you 15% of your energy bill? Wow. And what if every landlord are required to have one in there? Fantastic. So again, I'm tech positive. I think it's going to really, really help, especially in those scenarios. So I would love to talk more about that.
That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. Good question. Ruth, we'll come back to you. I think you had a couple other questions as well.
Well, one of my concerns is, in listening to you talk, is all I hear is people getting lazier and less accountable. And they operate their life from their sofa. I'm sorry, but I'm a little nervous about that.
Yes. And to be honest, you should be, because some humans anyway, can really fall into that trap of, what was that one movie where everybody's floating around in space, the cartoon characters, and they all get to be 300 pounds.
Wall-E.
Wall-E, yeah, Wall-E. Yeah. That's certainly something that can happen, but we also see where technology is going to help us to be more active and remind us to do things. I can't tell you how much, even in the past year, just the Fitbit has really caused me to change my behavior and go, wait a minute, okay, I should walk more. Okay, I'm almost there for the day. It hasn't buzzed and given me my reward. So I think that we're going to be able to use technology to sort of gamify and teach us to do certain things and make us want to do those things. And if we get away from technology into pharma, I really think that we'll see things again in our lifetime that are a pharmaceutical aspect that we've got recreational pharma today, right? We've had it for years, the little blue pill, things like that. But imagine if you could take a pill that really made you want to clean your room. Wow. What parent wouldn't want to give that to their kid for a half hour? But what if you could take a pill that encouraged you or changed your mindset, not an antidepressant as much as something that just lit a fire under you and said, I really want to go to the gym. And maybe it's not a pill, maybe it's actually things like virtual reality. Virtual reality, the headsets that make the virtual environment that you can experience, things like that have actually been proven, scientifically proven, in touch with actual people on burn patients to reduce the need for pain medication by 70%. Somebody that's been in a burn unit and is in extreme pain can put on a headset. So no pharmaceutical, I'm not taking a pill, nothing in my body, just simply by what I'm looking at and what it teaches my brain to think. And it sends images that make that person feel almost cold and cool, and they don't feel like they're in pain. They don't feel like they're burning. So I think we're going to be able to use technology like VR to change how we think and almost rewire our brains to want to go to the gym without a pill, want to clean my room without, somebody saying, shh, do it, So again, I think technology can be used to almost gamify humans. Behavioral economics is a big topic the last few years in terms of, how we can use technology, even as simple as going through a lunch line. If you put a light over a bowl of fruit versus the bowl of fruit sort of behind the ice cream without a light on it, all of a sudden people buy more fruit, even though they're kids, and they eat it. So I think there's things we can do to change how we act and make smarter decisions, even if it is sort of gamifying us to do it.
Mike, Ruth brings up kind of an interesting point too. I'm thinking about is many of us are now working from home, or most of us are working from home. That work-life balance and getting up in the middle of the day, go for a bike ride, go for a walk. Is that in your opinion something you think health wise? Like, you talking about unintended consequences, is that going to be positive, or are we going to have other issues to contend with as we look at being our home is now our place we live, our place we work?
Yeah,
it's the one in place for everything.
I think that's where we have the opportunity to make it heaven or hell, right? You could certainly be in the mindset of, well, I woke up, rolled out of bed, and boom, all of a sudden I was on work calls and doing work, and I might as well check after dinner, and next thing you know, I'm working too much. We've heard those stories, but we've also heard the stories of people who said, I'm working from home, I'm going to block time on my calendar, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to work out, or some people even talking about not necessarily against going back to work, because they're like, I miss my coworkers, I'd love to be back to work, that'd be great, but my pets are going to be really mad because they're used to 3 walks a day now. And how do I juggle that? So I think we have to make, as humans, we have to make the choices that all these things that are possible still mean that we have the choice. We can choose to, let technology and let work overtake us and just be sitting at our computer from morning till night, or we can choose to say, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to do something different.
Very good. Any other questions that folks have, please feel free to post them to the chat room. Happy to take those. The other question I have, so a lot of us work in transportation, plan transportation systems for universities, for corporate campuses, for lots of locations. Those places are closed or severely cut back in the populations. As you look ahead at these advancements in technology, what advice would you have for this audience of how to think about this melding of what we've been doing for 2020 and how we might start coming back to your example about, do we just tape back the old model or do we build something new? What advice do you have for this group as we go into 2021 of how to maybe meld something from the past with something with the future?
And I think, many of us have heard, don't let a good crisis go to waste. So this is certainly a crisis. And so there's things that we know we've observed in our environments and our organizations that really needed to be changed, really needed to be, overtaken by something different. This is our opportunity to really push that through and say, let's change that. It's been overdue. But other things worked great and should persist in the future. So it really is the and, not the or. It's really look at everything with an honest, open mindset and say, okay, these things really work. These things really didn't. Maybe it's time to try to come with a new combination. It's taking the recipe from the past and saying, I never liked the cinnamon, but let's try the cardamom. Let's change that recipe just a little bit. We're not throwing the entire dish out. We're not going from pizza to potato soup. It's just changing it enough to say, let's get rid of the thing that, nobody ever liked that. And I don't know why we did it. The TPS reports and adding in things that maybe we were afraid of, right. Maybe we were cautious of. A lot of people are cautious about working from home. A lot of people are cautious about AI and automation and other things that we've had to accelerate because of COVID. And I was like, that's not so bad, some of it. But again, we've swung in one direction of a pendulum, and now we'll swing back to some version of the middle, I think. But we have to actively think about it and make conscious choices. And the part that I said about in the past, we could dream and think and imagine anything. We didn't have the capability. Mm-hmm. We've got the capability. Now what we lack is we need to get consensus. We need to decide what we want and get consensus. If we all agreed on what it was we wanted to do, the doing it is not the hard part. The doing it really increasingly is building consensus, having other people see that same dream, see that vision, and be honest about the pros and cons of all the choices we're facing.
Sure. Good feedback. Ruth had another question. Go ahead, Ruth.
My question is, I'm a big fan of British kind of police shows, and there's a lot of Big Brother watching. And so they have cameras everywhere. They track your credit card, your cell phone, but some of the technology you talk about with eye recognition just scares me that there's going to be this database about me somewhere, about all my behavior and my choices and my lifestyle and they're going to watch me. Is that a concern anybody else feels with all this new technology?
Don't we already have our own databases somewhere floating around where they know everything about us? I mean,
I think that's already happening.
yeah, I think that's pretty.
Still want to think there's some sense of privacy, but I'm the only one here.
Well, and one way to think of it though is, I mean, when I grew up, I watched shows like Little House on the Prairie, and you're like, well, okay, so that didn't have any technology at all, right? You know, Ma and Pa and, you know, Laura, right? And yet everybody in that community knew what everybody in that community did. You ordered something from a general store, everybody knew you ordered it. You built a new barn, everybody knew about it. You got a new horse, you named us, everybody knew. So everybody knew what you did, but they were sort of part of your community, part of your family, didn't mind. I think the thing that people are concerned with today is that all that data can be used by people that you don't know and you don't want to share. They're not part of your community. But I think that things like distributed ledger, you know, blockchain technology is going to help us do things, make transactions, and have data that benefits us, but other people won't know all the information about us. So I think blockchain is definitely part of the solution, separate from cryptocurrency, separate from Bitcoin and the finance side, but blockchain itself will allow us to have certain things out there in the public that other people can access data-wise, but other things dramatically protected and really behind a wall that you control.
Ruth, do you feel any better?
No, but
I won't tell you about the NSA and satellites. We'll save that for a later conversation.
yeah, at least in my house, I know whatever goes on in my house. There's no cameras here, so
That's right.
I'm protected.
Exactly. You're in Tucson. It's all good.
But one thing is, cameras in the future won't necessarily be used just to like see who you are. I mean, there'll be different ways of seeing if there's something in a space that's an issue. Your floor might actually be able to sense is somebody walking on it without taking a photo. So somebody's supposed to be in that room. Maybe it's a burglar. Maybe it's the housekeeper. Maybe it's somebody. The kids aren't supposed to be in that in the present room, Christmas wrapping room, and you won't necessarily have to use cameras. Low power Wi-Fi is going to be able to actually go through walls and detect if people are sitting down, lying down, or maybe have fallen and lying on the floor and need help without having to take their picture. So technology won't always have to use imagery to see what's going on. So there'll be different flavors of things that help protect you that you can opt in for, that don't need to catch you, you know, dressed the way you weren't intending to be taking a photo in and those kind of things.
All right, we have time for one last question. Peter, you're the lucky winner. You get the last question. Just have to unmute your microphone.
I think to be successful in creating sustainable transportation in the future, we're going to have changes in behavior on a wider scale than we have it now. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments about sort of the strange situation we had where a large segment of the country's population decided not to wear masks and created, think that the COVID virus is a hoax. And somehow we need some champions who can be widely influential to demonstrate the benefits of improved transportation choices.
Yeah, and I see your note in the chat, and masks is one of the things I've used over the last few months as an example of the difference between a trend and a driving force. When we go to the store and we see most people wearing a mask, it's like, oh, well, that's the trend. But we have to really understand what the driving forces are, because some people were wearing those masks because they were concerned for their personal health. Others weren't concerned about their health at all, but were concerned about the health of others, or even concerned about peer pressure. Others did it because the store told them or the government told them they had to or should. So it's really important that we look at that driving force of why people are doing the things they're doing or not doing the things they're doing. Because only looking at the trend only tells us what's visible, what's obvious. We really need to look at those underlying things and, again, send more messages out that communicate the right driving force. And it might be that some of the technology, such as the one I showed that actually can detect virus load in the air, biovirus load in the air in real time, that even people would say, nah, I'm feeling pretty good. And well, I don't have to anymore. They said I don't, but wait, the numbers what? Oh, I'm putting that mask on. Because they don't know what the next thing is. So it may not be COVID. The next thing's going to be the next thing. So I think some of this technology might encourage us to be ready and change our behavior, at least in certain circumstances where I can say, hey, this environment's code orange versus code green. So protect yourself.
Good point. We're at the top of the hour. Mike, thank you so much for this overview. I think this was great.
Yeah, this is great.
Appreciate the time, and thank you all for taking the time to join the discussion. We will have this on recording for folks who weren't able to listen live or want to access it as a follow-up. Thanks in advance to Elizabeth and the rest of the Act Valley of the Chapter Sun board for all of our help for the webinar series. And we'll be back with you in the new year with a new schedule. So in the meantime, have a good rest of your week and be safe.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, great.
Take care.